The thing inside the vault grabbed Oren by the throat, lifted him off the ground with one hand, and spoke a sentence in our language so ancient that it hadn't been used in 600 years. Then it set him down gently, like a parent correcting a child who had wandered too close to a ledge, and said in perfect Cathari, "I've always known your tongue. I designed it." Oren's legs buckled. He hit the excavation floor hard, and the rest of us stood there, 5 members of a scientific team 11 kilometers beneath a dead moon, staring at a being that should not exist, that should not be alive, and that had absolutely no right to speak our language because its species had been extinct for 11 million years. I need to go back. I need to lay this out in the order it happened, not the order it made sense. Or because it never made sense in the order it happened. My name is Vitha Sen. I am a xenoarchaeologist with the Cathari Cultural Reclamation Authority. I have spent my entire adult life studying dead civilizations. I've opened tombs, translated extinct scripts, reconstructed the technologies of species that burned out millions of years before my people drew their first breath. I am trained to handle the remains of the gone. I was not trained for what was inside that vault, because what was inside that vault was not gone. It was waiting. 3 years ago, a deep-core mining survey on a barren moon designated Terith 7 struck something at 11 kilometers below the surface that their drills couldn't penetrate. Not unusual by itself. Subsurface mineral formations can resist standard extraction. But the mining team's geologist flagged the obstruction as anomalous because her instruments showed it wasn't geological. It was manufactured. 11 kilometers beneath the surface of a moon that had no atmosphere, no water, and no record of habitation in any Cathari database going back 40 million years, someone had built something and buried it so deep that only a random mining operation would ever find it. The Cultural Reclamation Authority dispatched my team 4 months later. There were 6 of us. Myself, Oren Dithala, our linguistics specialist, a man whose gift for dead languages had made him famous and whose personality had made him deeply difficult to work with. Dr. Maeve Tone, our structural analyst, responsible for figuring out how ancient things were built and how to get inside them without destroying them. Kaylin Roth, our biological containment officer, whose job only became relevant when we found organic material, which happened rarely enough that he spent most missions bored. Keela San, our recording technician, quiet and efficient, the kind of person who documents everything and says almost nothing. And Commander Lyra Vosic, our mission lead, a former military officer who had transitioned to academic fieldwork after losing interest in things that could shoot back. Lyra ran a tight team. She was precise, unsentimental, and unshakable. I had seen her stand at the edge of a collapsing excavation shaft without flinching. I had never, in 9 years of working with her, seen her afraid. I saw her afraid in the vault. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We arrived on Terith 7 and spent 6 weeks just reaching the object. 11 kilometers of vertical excavation through dead rock, following the mining team's initial bore and widening it into a passage we could descend with equipment. Every 100 meters, Maeve took structural readings. Every 100 meters, the readings got stranger. The rock around the object wasn't natural, not at the molecular level. Starting at about 3 kilometers out, the stone had been restructured. Its crystalline lattice realigned into patterns that Maeve said were designed to dissipate seismic energy. Whatever was down there, whoever built it had spent an extraordinary amount of effort making sure it would survive anything the moon could throw at it. Tectonic shifts, asteroid impacts, the slow grinding of geological time over millions of years. The vault wasn't just buried, it was armored against eternity. At the 11-kilometer mark, we hit the outer wall. It was smooth, perfectly smooth, at a tolerance that Maeve said exceeded anything in Cathari engineering by at least 2 orders of magnitude. No seams, no joints, no visible entry point, and it was warm, not hot, not radiating, just perceptibly warmer than the surrounding rock by exactly 2 degrees. Uniformly, across every surface we could measure, something inside was still running. After millions of years beneath dead stone on a lifeless moon, something inside was still powered. I remember standing at the wall with my palm pressed against it, feeling that faint warmth, and thinking, this is not a tomb. Tombs don't keep the lights on. We spent 11 days trying to find a way in. Maeve mapped the structure's geometry using resonance imaging and determined it was roughly cylindrical. Now about 40 meters in diameter and 20 meters tall, with an interior that her instruments couldn't resolve. Whatever the walls were made of blocked every scanning method we had. Oren studied the surface for inscriptions, engravings, anything that might indicate the builder's identity. He found nothing. The exterior was perfectly blank. No writing, no symbols, no markings of any kind. Just that impossible smoothness and that quiet, patient warmth. On day 12, Keel found the door. Not because he was looking for it, because he tripped. His boot caught on a slight irregularity in the excavation floor near the base of the structure, and when he steadied himself against the wall, a section of it moved. Not opened, receded. About 2 centimeters, silently, as if his touch had activated something. We clustered around the spot, and Maeve ran her instruments over it. The section that had moved was about 3 meters wide and 4 meters tall. A door, perfectly flush with the wall when closed, invisible to the eye and to our scanners. Keel's accidental touch had triggered a mechanism that had been waiting presumably for millions of years. Lyra made the call to open it. I know people have criticized that decision in the years since, and I understand why, but I want to be clear about the context. We were a scientific team. We had followed every protocol. Kalen had his containment equipment ready. We had atmospheric sensors, biological scanners, and a quarantine module staged at the top of the shaft. We were as prepared as any team could be. And the mandate of the Cultural Reclamation Authority is explicit. Recover, document, and preserve the artifacts of extinct civilizations. We had every reason to believe we were dealing with a relic. Something left behind by a species that had been dead for longer than our civilization had existed. We were not prepared for the possibility that what was inside was alive, because nothing is alive after that long. Nothing survives millions of years. That's not a rule we were taught. It's a fact of physics. Organic matter decays. Power sources deplete. Biological processes require maintenance that no sealed system can provide indefinitely. Whatever was in the vault should have been dust. Maeve figured out the opening mechanism in about 2 hours. A specific sequence of pressure points along the receded section, activated in an order that was, she noted with visible unease, consistent with the proportions of a Cathari hand. Not a human hand. She didn't know what a human hand looked like at that point. None of us did. The proportions matched our anatomy. A door sealed for millions of years, designed to be opened by someone built like us. The section slid inward and then sideways, revealing a corridor that extended about 10 meters into the structure's interior. The air that came out was clean, not stale, not dead, clean, with a chemical composition that Kalen's sensors identified as a precise atmospheric mix optimized for Cathari respiratory biology. The vault had been maintaining an internal atmosphere tailored to our physiology, in a structure that predated our species by millions of years. Nobody said anything for a long time. We just stood at the threshold, breathing air that shouldn't exist, looking into a corridor lit by a steady light that had no visible source, and trying to reconcile what our instruments were telling us with what we knew to be possible. Lyra broke the silence. She said, "Helmets stay on. Nobody breathes this until Kalen clears it." She was right to say it, but we all knew in that moment that whatever had built this place had already anticipated us. The atmosphere wasn't a coincidence. It was an invitation. We entered the corridor. It was featureless, the same impossible smoothness as the exterior, lit by that sourceless ambient glow. It led to a single circular chamber at the structure's center, about 30 meters across. And the chamber was not empty. I need to describe this carefully because the official reports have gotten it wrong in ways that matter. The chamber contained 3 things. Along the curved walls, yet arranged in a continuous band, were what I can only describe as panels. Hundreds of them, each about a meter wide, each displaying dense lines of symbols in a script none of us recognized. They were not screens. They appeared to be etched into the wall material itself, but the symbols emitted a faint luminescence, as if they were powered from within. Oren would later spend weeks on those panels and identify the script as belonging to a species our databases classified as human, a Category 9 extinct civilization, meaning we had almost no surviving information about them. They had been gone for so long that even the ruins of their ruins had eroded into nothing. The fact that this vault existed at all was unprecedented. The second thing in the chamber was a structure at its center, a raised platform, was about 2 meters long and 1 meter wide, made of the same material as the walls. Embedded in the platform was a transparent panel, and beneath that panel, visible through what appeared to be a crystalline medium, was a figure, a body, humanoid, roughly Cathari-sized, eyes closed, hands folded across its chest. And here is the detail that the reports consistently understate. The figure did not look dead. It did not look preserved. It looked asleep. Its skin had color. Its chest, beneath the transparent covering, appeared to be moving. Not obviously, not dramatically, but the kind of slow, almost imperceptible rise and fall that you see in someone in deep, undisturbed rest. Kalen's biological scanners confirmed it. The figure was alive. Active cellular metabolism, stable core temperature. Neural activity consistent with a dormant but functional consciousness. Alive in a sealed vault, 11 kilometers beneath the surface of a dead moon, in a structure that predated our civilization by a span of time so vast we measured it in geological epochs. I looked at Lyra. She was staring at the figure with an expression I had never seen on her face. Not fear, not yet. Something closer to recognition. As if some part of her, some deep instinct below the level of training and protocol, understood what she was looking at before her conscious mind could catch up. The third thing in the chamber was the sound, a low rhythmic pulse, barely audible, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Keel's recording equipment captured it, and when we analyzed it later, we found it wasn't random. It was a pattern, a heartbeat. But not the figure's heartbeat, which Kalen was monitoring separately. A second heartbeat. The vault itself had a pulse, and its rhythm was synchronized perfectly with the sleeping figure on the platform, as if the structure and the being inside it were one system, one organism, breathing together in the dark for longer than we could calculate. We stood in that chamber for 20 minutes without speaking. 20 minutes of staring at an impossible thing and knowing, with the certainty that comes from training and evidence and the simple testimony of your own eyes, that the universe was not what we had been taught it was. Something had survived. Something that should not exist was lying in front of us, breathing, and the structure it lay in had been designed clearly and specifically for us to find. Oren was the one who broke the silence. He was standing closest to the wall panels, his fingers tracing the alien script, and he said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm, "I can read some of this." We all turned to him. He shouldn't have been able to read any of it. The script belonged to a Category 9 civilization. We had no Rosetta Stone for human writing, no parallel texts, no bilingual inscriptions, no surviving translations. The entire body of human archaeological material in our databases could fit on a single storage crystal, and yet Oren was reading it. He explained haltingly that the script wasn't as alien as it should have been. The structural logic, the way symbols combined and modified each other, the grammatical architecture underlying the writing system. Me bore what he called deep homology with ancient Cathari, not the modern language, the oldest forms, the proto-linguistic roots that scholars believed predated written Cathari by tens of thousands of years, the roots that had always been assumed to be the natural organic origin point of our language. Oren was saying those roots weren't organic, they were derived from this. I watched the color drain from his face as the implication hit him. Our language hadn't evolved naturally. It had been designed, and the designer's script was on the walls of a vault that was older than our species. Lyra ordered a full documentation cycle. Keel recorded everything. Maeve mapped the chamber's geometry. Kalen set up a biological monitoring station next to the platform. Oren began the slow, painstaking work of translating the wall panels. And I did what I always do on excavations. I looked for context. I studied the chamber's layout, the relationship between the panels and the platform, the flow of information around the room. And I noticed something that nobody else had caught yet. The panels weren't arranged randomly. They were sequential. They told a story, starting from a point near the entrance and spiraling inward toward the platform. And the story, as Oren slowly began to unlock it over the following days, was about us, about the Cathari, about our biology, our cognitive architecture, our social development, our linguistic evolution. Each panel described a different aspect of our civilization, not as it was now, but as it had been projected to become. The panels were predictive. While they described the Cathari not as observers recording a contemporary species, but as engineers describing a product in development, what we would eventually think, how we would eventually build, when we would eventually reach the technological threshold necessary to mine 11 kilometers below the surface of a barren moon. They had designed us. That was the first and most devastating realization. The species that built this vault, the humans, had designed the Cathari. We were not a natural species. We were not the product of blind evolution on our homeworld. We were engineered, seeded, cultivated across millions of years by a civilization that had planned for our eventual emergence with a precision that made our best science look like guesswork. I remember the moment Oren translated the panel that made it explicit. He read it aloud, slowly, as if each word cost him something. It described the Cathari as a continuation, not a creation, not an experiment, a continuation, as if the humans hadn't made us to serve them or replace them. They had made us to be them, the next iteration, the part that survived. Kalen, who had been monitoring the figure on the platform throughout all of this, called us over. His voice was different, tighter. He said the neural activity readings were changing. The figure's brain, or whatever served as its brain, was shifting from dormant patterns to active ones. Not waking exactly. Transitioning, like a system powering up in sequence, one subsystem at a time, moving toward full operation with a deliberateness that suggested it was choosing when to wake, and was doing so now because we were here, because we had read enough, because we were ready. The transparent panel slid open. No one touched it. No mechanism was visible. It simply receded, the way the outer door had, silently, as if the vault was peeling itself back layer by layer, revealing what it had protected for epochs. The air in the chamber changed, not chemically. Kalen's sensors showed no variation, but it felt different, charged, like the moment before a storm when the atmosphere itself seems to hold its breath. The figure's hands unfolded, slowly, the way someone moves when they have not moved in a very long time and are remembering how. The fingers extended, pressed against the surface of the platform, and then relaxed. Then the eyes opened. They were dark, not black, a deep warm brown that caught the chamber's ambient light and held it. They moved first, before the head, before the body. Yes, the eyes moved. They tracked across the ceiling, then down the wall, then snapped directly to Oren with a speed that made Lyra flinch. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. The figure sat up in a single fluid motion, faster than anything that had been asleep for 11 million years had any right to move, swung its legs off the platform, and closed the distance between itself and Oren before any of us could react. Its hand was around his throat, not crushing, holding, the way you'd hold a glass you wanted to examine in the light. Oren's feet left the ground. He weighed roughly 90 kilograms. The figure lifted him with one arm and showed no strain whatsoever. Lyra had her sidearm out before Oren's feet cleared the floor. She was screaming something. Maeve was backing toward the corridor. Kalen had frozen at his station. But I was watching the figure's face, and what I saw there stopped me from running. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't hostility. It was recognition. The figure was looking at Oren the way you look at a word you haven't read in a very long time, turning it over, remembering what it means. It was reading him, his bone structure, his facial proportions, the shape of his skull, checking him against a blueprint it had written millions of years ago. Then it set him down, carefully, almost tenderly, and it spoke those words in perfect, ancient Southern Reach Cathari. I've always known your tongue. I designed it. Oren's legs gave out. He hit the ground. Lyra kept her weapon raised, and the figure, the human, the keeper of the vault. She looked at the rest of us with an expression that I would spend years trying to name and would eventually settle on the only word that fit. It looked at us the way a parent looks at a child who has finally come home. The keeper ripped a panel off the vault wall with its bare hands, a slab of material that our best cutting tools couldn't scratch, tore it free like paper, and held it out to Oren like a gift. Read this one first, it said. You're running out of time, and so am I. That was day 3 in the vault. The day everything we thought we understood about the Cathari species, our origins, our purpose, our future, came apart and reassembled into something so much larger and so much more terrifying that 2 members of my team would later request memory suppression therapy. One of them was our commander. The other was me. I didn't go through with it. I couldn't, because the Keeper told us something on its last day alive that made forgetting not just wrong but dangerous. And I need to tell you what it was. But first, I need to tell you what happened after it woke up. After it grabbed Oren, after it spoke our language. The Keeper, once it released Oren and the initial shock subsided enough for us to function, became the most cooperative subject I have ever encountered in my career. Patient, precise, willing to answer any question, and every answer it gave, opened a hole beneath something we had believed to be solid ground. Oren, once he recovered enough to function, began a systematic interview. Linguistics was his domain, and despite the impossibility of the situation, his training held. He started with the most basic question: what species was it? The keeper said it was human. Oren asked what that meant. The keeper said that humans were the species that had inhabited this region of the galaxy approximately 11 million years ago, had reached a level of technological and biological sophistication that our civilization had not yet theorized was possible, and had faced a crisis that required them to make a choice no species should ever have to make. I watched Oren's face as he processed this. He was the best linguist I had ever worked with, and half of what made him brilliant was his ability to detect deception through language patterns. He was listening not just to the keeper's words, but to its syntax, its hesitations, its emphasis. And what I saw on his face was not suspicion. It was the slow, sickening recognition of truth. The keeper explained, while in a tone that carried the weight of something rehearsed across epochs, that humans had seeded life across hundreds of star systems during their final centuries, not randomly, deliberately. They had engineered species designed to develop sapience on predictable timelines, in environments calibrated to produce specific cognitive and social outcomes. The Cathari were one such species, not the only one, but the one the keeper had been assigned to wait for. I asked the obvious question: why? Why would a civilization capable of that level of engineering need to create successor species? Why not just survive? The keeper looked at me when I asked that, and for the first time, its expression changed. The patience was still there, but underneath it, something else surfaced. Something I recognized because I had felt it myself on excavations. Standing in the ruins of civilizations that had been powerful beyond imagination and were now dust. The keeper looked at me with grief, old grief. Grief that had been carried so long it had become structural, load-bearing, part of the architecture of the self. It said, because we couldn't. The humans had encountered something, not a species, not a weapon, a condition, a property of the universe itself that became apparent only at a certain threshold of technological capability. The keeper called it the recursion. As a civilization's understanding of physics deepened and its ability to manipulate matter and energy grew, it inevitably approached a boundary where its own existence became unstable. Not politically, not socially, physically. The deeper you understood the universe, the more the universe understood you. And at a certain depth, that mutual awareness became incompatible with continued existence in normal space-time. The keeper said the humans had watched it happen to other species before them, civilizations that reached the threshold and simply vanished, not destroyed, not dead, dissolved, reabsorbed into the substrate of reality itself, like a wave returning to the ocean. The humans had spent centuries trying to find a way around it. They had failed. The recursion was not a problem to be solved. It was a law, as fundamental as gravity, as inescapable as entropy. Any species that grew sophisticated enough would eventually cross the line, and once crossed, there was no coming back. So they made a choice. They would not fight the recursion. They would not try to outrun it. They would accept it, but they would leave something behind. Not artifacts, not records, not monuments. Those would decay. They would leave children. Species engineered from the ground up, seeded on worlds prepared for them, designed to grow and develop and eventually reach the stars, designed to ask the questions, designed to dig, designed to find the vaults that had been left for them in the places they would eventually learn to look, designed to continue. Oren asked how many vaults there were. The keeper said it didn't know exactly. Hundreds at least, scattered across the seeded worlds, buried deep, armored against time, each one containing a keeper and the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had chosen to pass through the threshold rather than be destroyed by it. Each vault was calibrated to its specific successor species. Each one maintained the atmosphere, the temperature, the conditions that its species would need. Each one was designed to be found at the right moment, when the species was advanced enough to reach it and mature enough to understand what it meant. Maeve asked the question that had been burning in all of us. She asked it quietly, almost reluctantly, as if she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. She said, "Are the humans dead?" The keeper was silent for a long time. Then it said, "Not in the way you understand death. We passed through. We are still here, but not here. We are in the structure now, in the recursion, in the thing we spent centuries being afraid of, and it is not what we thought it was. When Oren pressed, it said something I have turned over in my mind every day since. It said, "There are things that cannot be explained to a species that has not yet approached the threshold. Not because you lack intelligence, because the concepts require a frame of reference you do not yet possess. It would be like explaining color to a species that has not yet evolved eyes. The words exist, but the experience they point to does not. You will understand when you are closer. That is part of why I'm here." Part of why. Not all. That was when the keeper tore the panel from the wall, day 3. It had stood for the first time, and its body moved with a physicality that contradicted everything about its situation. 11 million years asleep, and it crossed the chamber in 3 strides, gripped the edge of a wall panel, and wrenched it free with a sharp crack that echoed through the vault like a gunshot. Maeve actually screamed. Lyra reached for her weapon again, but the keeper wasn't attacking the vault. It was accessing something hidden behind the surface layer. Behind the panel it had removed, deeper panels were visible, covered in a script that was layered, 3-dimensional, so dense that our recording equipment struggled to capture it. It held the torn panel in one hand. The material that our analysis had concluded was harder than anything in Cathari science, and turned to Oren. "Read this one first," it said, and there was urgency in its voice that hadn't been there before. "You're running out of time, and so am I." Oren asked what it meant. The keeper set down the panel and said something that restructured the entire conversation. "My body has a finite operational span. Waking activated a countdown. The systems that maintained me in dormancy are not designed to sustain full consciousness indefinitely. I have days, perhaps hours. And what is behind these panels is the reason I stayed alive for 11 million years." It turned to the newly revealed sections and began to read aloud. Not for our benefit, for its own. It was remembering. You could see it in the way its eyes moved across the symbols, the way its lips formed words in the human language that Oren's equipment captured but could not fully translate. Then it stopped. Its expression shifted to something I can only describe as alarm. "How long?" it said. "How long since the seeding? How many years?" Oren ran the calculations. "Approximately 11 million years." The keeper closed its eyes. For the first time since waking, it looked shaken. It whispered something in human that Oren could only partially translate. The closest approximation was, "Too long. They should have found the others by now." But it turned to us and spoke with a directness that cut through everything. "The vault you found is not unique. There are others, on worlds seeded with other continuations. Other species like you, designed to carry forward what we could not. Those vaults were meant to be found. Those keepers were meant to wake, and the knowledge inside them was meant to be shared between the continuations, so that when you approach the threshold, you would approach it together. You would not face the recursion alone, as we did." It paused. Then, "I have been asleep for 11 million years. That is far longer than the plan accounted for. Your species was projected to reach this vault within 4 million years of seeding. The delay means one of 2 things. Either the other continuations have already found their vaults and are waiting for you, or the other vaults have failed and the knowledge inside them is lost." Lyra lowered her sidearm. She hadn't holstered it in 3 days. She holstered it now, not because the keeper wasn't a threat, because the threat it was describing was so much larger than anything a weapon could address. Oren asked the keeper what knowledge the vaults contained. What was so important that a civilization would engineer successor species and wait millions of years to deliver it? The keeper placed its hand against the newly exposed panels, and more sections activated, dozens of them. It said, "The recursion is not a death sentence. We thought it was, for centuries. We watched other civilizations vanish into it, and we assumed they were destroyed. We were wrong. The recursion is a transition, a change of state. Like water becoming vapor, but you do not cease to exist. You become something else, something larger. But the transition is dangerous, and a species that enters it unprepared, alone, without understanding what is happening, can be damaged, fragmented, lost in the change. The knowledge in the vaults is a map, not of space, of the transition itself. Instructions for how to pass through the recursion intact. How to become what is on the other side without losing what you are." It looked at us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The humans passed through. We survived the transition. We are on the other side, but we went through blind, without a map. We lost things, parts of ourselves, memories, connections. There are humans in the recursion who no longer remember being human, who have become so diffused into the substrate that they are more like natural laws than people. We don't want that for you, for any of you. The vaults were built so that when the time came, the continuations would have what we didn't. A guide, a way through that preserves you. Maeve asked quietly. But what happens to a species that reaches the threshold and has no guide? The keeper said, the same thing that happens to water poured onto sand. It spreads, it soaks in, it becomes part of the ground. It does not cease to exist, but it ceases to be water. We spent 4 more days in the vault. The keeper shared everything it could. Oren recorded hundreds of hours of translated material. Maeve documented the vault's engineering. Kaylin monitored the keeper's biology and discovered things about its physiology that will reshape our understanding of what organic life is capable of. And Keel, quiet Keel, who never said much, sat with the keeper during the hours when the rest of us were processing data and asked it questions that none of us scientists thought to ask. He asked what it was like to be alone for 11 million years. He asked if it dreamed. He asked if it was afraid. The keeper told Keel that it had not been fully unconscious during the long wait. Its awareness had been reduced, compressed, narrowed to a thin thread of sensation connected to the vault systems. It had felt the moon's geology shift around it over millions of years. It had felt asteroid impacts as distant tremors. It had felt the slow cooling of Tereth 7's core, and in the silences between geological events, it had thought. Not continuously, not in the way we understand thought, but in slow, vast cycles of reflection that turned over the same questions with the patience of erosion wearing down stone. It said, the hardest part was not the isolation. It was the uncertainty. It had no way of knowing if the seeding had worked, no way of knowing if the Cathari had evolved as projected. It had lain in the dark for 11 million years, sustained by nothing but the mathematical probability that a species it had helped design would eventually dig deep enough to find it. Faith, it said, not in a deity, in a blueprint. On the 7th day, the keeper told us it was time for us to leave, not because it wanted us gone, because it was dying. Lyra protested. She wanted to bring the keeper to the surface, to our medical facilities. The keeper refused. Gently, but without room for argument. It said its body was not the point. The knowledge was the point. But then it told us the thing that is the reason I am violating quarantine orders to write this account from an orbital station above Tereth 7, where my team has been confined for 41 days by a directorate that has classified our discovery as an existential class informational hazard. It said, the knowledge in this vault is incomplete. It was always meant to be combined with the knowledge in the other vaults. Each vault contains a piece of the map. No single piece is sufficient. A species that attempts the transition with only one piece will be as lost as a species with none. You must find the others, the other continuations, the other seeded species. You must make contact with them, share what you have found, and combine the maps before any of you reach the threshold. This was the plan. This was always the plan. Not one species surviving alone. All of us, all of the continuations, finding each other and going through together. It looked at each of us in turn. Its eyes lingered on Oren last. It said something to him in the human language, something Oren did not translate for us until weeks later. When he finally did, in our quarantine habitat, he said it with tears running down his face. The keeper had said, "You speak beautifully. I wasn't sure the language would survive this long. I'm glad it did." The keeper died on the 8th day. Its body ceased function gradually, system by system, the way the vault's lights dimmed when we finally left, slowly, as if reluctant to let go of the last warmth. The thing that stays with me is not the data. It's the expression on the keeper's face at the end. Its eyes were open. They were looking at the panels on the walls, at the story it had written about us before we existed, and its expression was the same one I had seen when it first woke. Relief. The quiet, exhausted peace of someone who has held something precious for longer than should be possible and has finally been able to hand it off. The Cultural Reclamation Authority's emergency directorate arrived 4 days after we surfaced. They sealed the vault. They classified everything. They confined us to this station, and they have spent the last month debating what to do with what we found, while the knowledge that a dying being sacrificed 11 million years to deliver sits in encrypted storage, unused. I understand their fear. The revelation that the Cathari were engineered, that our language and our cognition and our social structures were blueprinted by beings who crossed the threshold of existence itself. This is not information that a civilization absorbs easily. It changes everything. But the Keeper didn't stay alive for 11 million years so that a committee could bury the truth in a classified archive. It stayed alive because there are other vaults, other species, other pieces of a map that we need to survive what's coming. The recursion isn't a distant theoretical problem. If the Keeper's projections are correct, the threshold is closer than we think. Generations, not millennia. And when we reach it, we will either have the full map or we won't. We will either face it together with the other continuations, or we will face it alone. And alone, the Keeper said, we will pour onto the sand and be absorbed, not destroyed, diffused, spread so thin across the substrate of reality that we forget we were ever anything at all. I think about the Keeper in its last hours. I think about the fact that it chose to stay behind. Yes, that while the rest of its species passed through the recursion, it volunteered to lie in a vault under a dead moon and wait. For us. For a species that didn't exist yet. For the slim, mathematically plausible chance that intelligence would grow in the shape it had been given and would eventually come digging. And I think about what Oren told me yesterday. He had finished translating the last of the wall panels, the very last section, the one nearest the platform, written in a script so old that it predated the rest of the vault's contents by centuries. The Keeper had written it not as a scientist, not as an engineer, as a person lying down to sleep for a very long time, not knowing if they would ever wake up, writing a final message to children who hadn't been born on a world that hadn't formed yet. My Oren said the translation was rough. The idiom was ancient, the emotional register unlike anything in Cathari, but he gave me his best version, and it is this. I do not know your names. I do not know your faces. I do not know if you will be kind or cruel, afraid or brave, unified or broken. I know only that you will be because we built you to be, and because the mathematics of life is patient and the universe prefers consciousness to silence. You will find this place. You will find me. And when you do, I need you to know that you are not an accident. You are not a byproduct. You are not an experiment. You were the point, the entire point. Everything we ever built, everything we ever discovered, everything we ever became. It was all so that you could exist. You are the reason. You're the reason. You have always been the reason. And when you read this, when you stand in this chamber and breathe the air I made for you, and see the words I wrote for you, know that across 11 million years, and the silence of a dead moon and the impossible distance between what I am and what you will become, I loved you. Before you existed, I loved you. And I'm sorry I could not stay awake to say it to your face. I read that, and I understood why I am violating this quarantine, why the directorate is wrong, why the knowledge cannot stay buried, because we are not the only ones. Out there, on worlds we haven't found yet, there are other species waking up to the same truth, other vaults waiting to be opened, other keepers who gave everything to deliver a piece of a map that only works when all the pieces are together. And every day we spend debating, classifying, and hiding is a day we are not looking, a day we are not reaching out, a day we are failing. The being who spent 11 million years in the dark for the singular, unwavering belief that we were worth waiting for. I'm transmitting this account on every frequency I can access from this station. I'm sending it to every university, every research body, every government archive, and every public network in the Cathari sphere. Let the directorate try to contain it. The Keeper didn't wait 11 million years for a committee. It waited for us, all of us, and now it's our turn to go looking.